After the death of his third wife, King Henry VIII wore black for months, but she was one of the only wives Henry mourned. King Henry VIII is one of the most famous kings in English history, best remembered for his 6 queens. Although Henry loved many women throughout his life, and even fathered illegitimate children, the 6 women he chose to rule England with him all left powerful legacies. Some pushed for women's education, while others worked to soften the king, who was ruthless both in politics and his personal life. They were able to shape the king and English history. His second wife even allowed King Henry VIII to defy the Catholic Church and change world history. It's time to look at each of these women, who had fascinating lives and personalities, and were much more than just the king's wife. Life was uncertain for them, but they occupied a central place in English history and continue influencing today's world. Number 1. Katherine of Aragon. Katherine of Aragon hailed from Spain and was the daughter of King Ferdinand II of Aragon and Queen Isabella I of Castile. She was incredibly well-educated, multilingual, and well-read, and her parents determined she should marry well. She was their youngest daughter, so after securing ties with kingdoms in Austria and Portugal, her parents promised Katherine of Aragon to Arthur Tudor of England before she was 4. Arthur and Katherine married on November 14, 1501. Arthur claimed to have consummated the marriage, and the couple moved to Ludlow Castle on the Welsh border. They both fell ill, and Arthur died 5 months after the wedding. In a precarious situation as a teenage widow, Katherine claimed she and Arthur had not consummated the marriage. King Henry VII, determined to keep her whole dowry, decided she should marry Arthur's brother, the future King Henry VIII. Katherine and Henry married on June 11, 1509, and Katherine quickly became pregnant. Sadly, their first baby was stillborn, and most of their other pregnancies ended in miscarriages or stillborn infants. Although they started with a strong relationship, the lack of children eroded Henry's devotion to Katherine. They had 2 living children. Their son died around 2 months old. Thus, Katherine's only surviving child was Mary, born on February 18, 1516. While Katherine focused on Mary, Henry VIII found a few mistresses to occupy his time, one of whom became pregnant in 1519 with a boy named Henry Fitzroy. After the boy was born, Henry VIII distanced himself from Katherine. By 1525, the king was in love with Anne Boleyn, who eventually became his second wife. Number 2. Anne Boleyn. Anne Boleyn was one of Queen Catherine's ladies-in-waiting and came from a wealthy, noble family. She served at the French court for about 7 years, increasing her education by learning French and art. She finally returned to England in 1522. By then, King Henry VIII was already in the habit of taking mistresses, so when he turned his attention to Anne, she was not unaware. However, she had seen how the king treated her older sister Mary, one of his earlier mistresses, and was hesitant to enter into such a relationship. Some say she refused him for over a year, but finally agreed to become involved with him if she became his wife. Henry decided he had to annul his marriage with Katherine, from whom he had grown distant. The problem was that the Catholic Church frowned upon dissolving marriages. The Pope had to approve any annulments or divorces, and Katherine fought hard to save her marriage, even sending Pope Clement VII a letter explaining the situation. When the Pope denied the annulment, King Henry VIII decided to take more drastic measures. He separated from the Catholic Church and started the Church of England. As the leader of the Church of England, Henry annulled his marriage with Katherine and then married Anne Boleyn in 1533. Her coronation occurred in June 1533, after their wedding and the official annulment of Henry and Katherine's marriage. Henry filled the 4-day-long ceremony with luxuries in an attempt to win over the English people. They were not impressed. Many were still loyal to Queen Katherine, but they eventually accepted Anne Boleyn as the new queen. Anne bore her first child on September 7, 1533, and named her Elizabeth Tudor. Sadly, Elizabeth was Anne's only healthy baby. The queen became pregnant twice more, but one was a miscarriage and the other a stillbirth, a baby boy. After only 3 years of marriage, King Henry VIII was frustrated with the lack of sons and decided to eliminate Anne. Historians believe this frustration eventually led him and other influential nobles to ruin Anne's reputation, spreading rumors about her having affairs with several other men, including her brother. The queen was arrested on May 2, 1536. She was accused of treason, but nothing more specific. Henry ordered Anne to be beheaded. He requested a French executioner who used a sword instead of an axe. Anne was executed on May 19, 1536, maintaining her innocence until the end. With Anne's death, Henry VIII continued the dangerous habit of getting rid of wives, which would continue to plague his personal life. Number 3. Jane Seymour. King Henry VIII married Jane Seymour, Anne's maid of honor, a junior to the lady-in-waiting, 11 days after Anne Boleyn's execution, although he had been courting her for some time. Jane was very different from Henry's previous two wives. She was meek and submissive and interested in domestic hobbies like embroidery. Some historians believe Henry chose Jane because she was a direct contrast to Anne's headstrong personality. But Jane was not dull. She did prompt the king about personal matters, convincing him to treat his two daughters kindly. While the king still insisted they were not part of the line of succession, they were allowed to attend royal events and were well cared for. Although Jane and the king married quickly, Henry did not arrange for Jane's coronation, claiming they needed to wait out the plague in London. Some people also believed he would not crown Jane queen until she produced a son. However, she did not become pregnant until January 1537, delivering a healthy baby boy on October 12th. Prince Edward immediately became Henry's heir, and finally, all seemed to be going well for the king. Unfortunately, Edward's birth had taken 2 days, and Jane quickly moved from exhausted to ill. Historians are unsure of her exact illness, but she died less than 2 weeks after Edward was born. Jane was one of Henry's shortest-lived wives, but she profoundly impacted him. He mourned her until 1538, wanting Jane to be well remembered and respected for the woman she was. Number 4. Anne of Cleves. King Henry VIII waited 2 years before marrying his next wife, the longest he spent between marriages his entire adult life. He finally married Anne of Cleves in 1540. Anne was born on September 22, 1515, in the Duchy of Cleves, an independent state in the Holy Roman Empire. As such, she was raised Protestant, which made her a good prospect for King Henry, who was beginning to feel international pressure from other Catholic nations like France. Anne of Cleves was attractive, but too tall and robust for King Henry VIII's tastes. When she arrived in England on January 1, 1540, the king was less than impressed. Despite first impressions, he still agreed to marry her on January 6th. However, Anne of Cleves and King Henry VIII never consummated their marriage. Some sources suggest Anne didn't understand that part of marriage. Others say Henry intentionally chose not to get involved with her. Only a few months after their marriage, King Henry VIII asked for an annulment, which promptly caused the queen to faint. She initially rejected his request, but Anne was intelligent. She knew the dangers of refusing King Henry anything. She finally agreed, and they annulled their marriage on July 9, 1540. This annulment marked Anne of Cleves as Henry's ugly wife, for Henry blamed the failed marriage on her looks and several other things she could not control. While that may seem cruel today, Anne's agreement to the annulment probably saved her life. King Henry took good care of her, giving her 4 separate homes, including Hever Castle and Bletchingley Manor, an annual salary, and all the things she had acquired during their marriage. Anne of Cleves was treated like part of the royal family and was called the sister of the king. Her life after their marriage was the most positive of Henry's 6 wives. She regularly attended the king's court and became good friends with him in time. Anne was also close with Princesses Mary and Elizabeth, allowing her positive influences to extend beyond her unsuccessful marriage and her death in 1557. Number 5. Katherine Howard. Even before King Henry VIII annulled his marriage with Anne of Cleves, he had picked his next bride, a teenage girl named Katherine Howard. She was between 15 and 19 when the two married on July 28, 1540. At this point, Henry was 49, about 30 years older than her. In many ways, Katherine was still a girl. She had lived with the Dowager Duchess of Norfolk with other young ladies, learning how to conduct themselves appropriately to land a good marriage. She had also had at least 2 romantic relationships there, although one may not have been consensual. In 1539, Katherine moved to her uncle's house, met Thomas Culpeper, her distant cousin, and started a court position as a lady-in-waiting for Queen Anne of Cleves. Katherine was smitten by Thomas Culpeper's youth and appearance. The king was immediately interested in her. Less than a year later, they married, and King Henry enjoyed indulging his young queen. watching her play with her friends and overwhelming her with luxuries. She and Thomas Culpeper might have been considering marriage before King Henry VIII swooped in. It has been alleged that Thomas Culpeper even visited the Queen in her private rooms alone. By the fall of 1541, reports of the affair and her earlier romantic relationships had come before the king. She was imprisoned at Syon Abbey in Middlesex, and the king's love quickly turned to anger, partly because it had been based on the belief that she was too young and innocent for such romantic desires. Additionally, Culpeper was related to her. Catherine was found guilty and moved to the Tower of London on February 11, 1542. She was executed 2 days later, on February 13th, looking fragile and frightened. Katherine Howard's time as Henry's fifth wife was tragic, and her death left the aging monarch on the hunt for yet another wife. Number 6. Katherine Parr. By the time King Henry VIII was ready for a new wife, he was about 52 years old and quite sickly. For Katherine Parr, this was her third marriage and fit into the pattern of her others. Katherine was born in 1512 and grew up Protestant, which later became a defining part of her personality. At 17, she married Edward Berg, a man with chronic illness in his 20s. Katherine was only married to him for 4 years, but she learned how to run a household and care for a sick husband during that time. After he died, Katherine remarried in 1534 to John Neville, 3rd Baron Latimer. They were married for 9 years. Neville had children from earlier marriages, and Katherine quickly stepped into the family and cared for them. They moved to southern England and participated in the king's court. But when John Neville became sick, Katherine once again found herself caring for a dying husband. She tended to him until 1543. Some historians think her devotion during this time drew King Henry VIII's attention. Henry and Katherine married on July 12, 1543, and Katherine quickly proved herself to be patient and caring with Henry and his 3 children, giving them the love and education they needed. The only significant issues during this time were religious debates. When the religious leaders tried to arrest Katherine for heresy, Henry protected his wife, stating she was not to be questioned. The king trusted Katherine, eventually even reinstating Mary and Elizabeth into the royal succession at her request. And Katherine cared for the king as he declined. King Henry VIII died on January 28, 1547, leaving Katherine a widow. She went on to marry Thomas Seymour, but her time with King Henry cemented her role in history. Each of King Henry VIII's wives was unique, bringing something important to Henry's reign and English history, making them well worth examining as their influence continues to affect Britain today. How would you like to get a deeper understanding of history, impress your friends, and predict the future more accurately based on past events? If this sounds like something you might be into, then check out the brand new Captivating History Book Club by clicking the first link in the description. To learn more about Henry VIII's 6 wives, check out our book, The 6 Wives of Henry VIII, a captivating guide to Catherine of Aragon, Anne Belin, Jane Seymour, Anne of Cleves, Katherine Howard, and Katherine Parr. It's available as an ebook, paperback, and audiobook. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button and subscribe for more videos like this.